reforms and is currently being looked into, I will gladly meet with her.
Secretary of State, Minster Davis.
In January, the Labour government committed they would be assisting 5 local inquiries, including one in Oldham, into grooming gangs and rape gangs. Mr. Speaker, now 2 months on,
Carry on, Secretary of State.
You should know better than that.
in January, the Labour government committed they would be assisting 5 local inquiries, including one in Oldham, into grooming and rape gangs. Mr. Speaker, now 2 months on, we've had no update from the government about the other locations. So in which towns can women and girls now sleep safely in their beds? And when and where are the other 4 inquiries going to take place? And what does the government plan to do about the other 45 towns and cities across the country where these gangs have reportedly operated?
Minister.
Well, what the government plans to do across the country is more than was done before. And what I would say is that the House should expect an update very soon on exactly all of the plans, as the Home Secretary, when she laid out her plans, that it would come before Easter. And I beg of the Honourable Lady the patience she offered her own government when they offered none of this.
We come to Topical Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to research, 52% of topical one.
Topical one. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government celebrated International Women's Day and Women's History Month by accelerating action to change women's lives. This means greater opportunities in the workplace, ensuring our streets are safe for women and that we have better public services for our women and their families. Harnessing the talents and skills of all women will boost our economy. A 5% increase in employment amongst women could boost the UK economy by up to £125 billion. Women's equality is at the heart of our plan for change and will drive economic growth for everyone.
Charlotte Nettles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to research, 52% of ICBs in England, including Cheshire and Merseyside ICB, still require same-sex couples to self-fund at least 6 to 12 cycles of costly intrauterine insemination before they're eligible to access IVF treatment on the NHS. So could the Secretary of State please tell us what she is doing to end the postcode lottery for lesbian and bi couples looking to start a family?
Minister.
My honourable friend is right to draw the House's attention to the postcode lottery and the patchy access to IVF across our country. We want to make sure that everyone has fair access to high-quality care. DHSC have started to make progress towards their ambition to improve access to IVF services, and we also await the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence concluding its review on clinical guidance for the provision of such services.
Shadow Minister Sakib Bhatt.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parents up and down the country are anxious about the use of puberty blockers on under 18, so I was disappointed to read that the Health Secretary has failed to intervene in an NHS puberty blocker trial, despite grave concerns about children's safety. I know the landmark CAS review said more evidence was needed, but I asked the Secretary of State, will she show moral courage and common sense leadership to ensure that these dangerous and irreversible drugs are never tested on our children?
Mr. Speaker, the government's position on this has been clear. We have accepted all of the recommendations brought forward by Dr Hilary Cass. I have met with Dr Hilary Cass to discuss this, but I think I'm afraid to say the Shadow Minister perhaps misunderstands the recommendations that Dr Cass brought forward, given the question that he's asking today.
Peter Lamb.
Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Minister what consideration has been given to the introduction of domestic abuse safe leave for employees experiencing domestic abuse?
Minister.
We strongly encourage employers to support their employees who experience domestic abuse. Many already do this through their membership of the Employers' Initiative on Domestic Abuse, which empowers employers to take action. The VOG strategy, along with myself, will be working with the DBT to look at issues specific to victims in the workplace.
Bob Blackman.
Will the Minister update the House on what changes, if any, she intends to make to the Equality Act 2010, and in particular, if she is going to make caste a protected characteristic will she ensure that people of all religions that emanate from the Indian subcontinent are consulted, because this will severely impact every single family in this country?
Mr Speaker, we have no plans to change the Equality Act, as my honourable friend set out earlier. Through the new race engagement group being led by Baroness Lawrence, we will consider any such questions, such as the ones that he identifies.
Melody On.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. After an appalling rape incident on the Fuller Street Bridge in my constituency, I was shocked to find that last year only 2.7% of recorded rapes in the UK resulted in a charge. What is the Minister doing to improve this charge rate and get justice for more survivors of this appalling crime?
I'm very sorry to hear of the case in my honourable friend's constituency, and it brings into sharp focus the need to tackle violence against women and girls and to ensure that our mission to halve violence against women and girls is delivered. The inheritance that we had from the Conservatives was shocking. Far too many women denied justice, cases never getting to court, or victims being left to wait for years for justice. That's why the Lord Chancellor has made this a priority to take action to deliver justice for women.
Before we come to Prime Minister's questions, can I welcome in the gallery the Chairman of the State of the Great Hurl, the Parliament of Mongolia. Now we come to Alberto Costa. Prime Minister's questions.
Question number 1, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last night I spoke to President Zelensky to discuss progress that President Trump had made with Russia towards a ceasefire, and I took the opportunity to reaffirm our unwavering support to the people of Ukraine. Mr Speaker, I'm deeply concerned about the resumption of Israeli military action in Gaza. The images of parents carrying their children, young children, to hospitals have emerged over the last few days are truly shocking, alongside the sheer number of people who've been killed. And we will do all that we can to ensure the resumption of the ceasefire, to get the remaining hostages out and to get aid that's desperately needed in. Mr Speaker, the whole House will want to celebrate the extraordinary life of Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway, the last known pilot of the Battle of Britain. The courage of his generation, the fearlessness, sense of duty and service secured our freedom, and we will never forget them. Mr Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Brain tumours kill more children and those under the age of 40 than any other cancer. Mr Speaker, from time to time, all of us get constituents in our surgeries that tell us stories which really get to us and twang on the heart. Mr Speaker, last Friday, Laura attended my Sharnford constituency. She told me of the tragic death of her 6-year-old, energetic, loving son, Talon, from a brain tumour. All that she asked, Mr Speaker, is that I raise this matter nationally, and I'm doing that now. But I'd like to go one step further. Would the Prime Minister agree to arrange a meeting for Laura and the brain tumour support group known as Angel Mums to meet with the relevant healthcare minister to discuss brain tumour research?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for doing what he was asked to do, which is raising this case here. The loss of a child is simply unbearable, and I think most of us, including myself, simply wouldn't know how we would be able to react. And I think the whole House will want to send its deepest condolences to Laura and to all of Talon's family and friends. I will happily make sure that the meeting that he requests takes place, so we can reassure that we are committed to supporting life-saving and life-improving research and doing all we can to improve how we prevent, detect, manage and treat cancer. Thank you.
Andrew Peck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Like many people in Peterborough, I am passionate about tackling low pay and insecure work, especially for young people. Next month, many of my constituents will receive a welcome boost in their pay packets due to the increase in the national minimum wage to government. Can I thank the Prime Minister for ignoring the voices on the opposite benches who continue to oppose our plans to make work pay? And can I urge him to go further and faster in delivering our plan for change for working people?
Well, I thank him. He's a superb job for Peterborough, and we're proud that our Employment Rights Bill is tackling the cost of insecure work, and we're delivering that pay rise for 3 million of the lowest paid. We know the Leader of the Opposition opposes all that. She thinks the minimum wage is a burden and that maternity pay is excessive. It's the same old Tories. They opposed the minimum wage in the first place. They've learned absolutely nothing.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor claimed that her budget was a once-in-a-Parliament reset. So why are we having an emergency budget next week?
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered record investment into this country. We've had 3 interest rates cut in a row, and wages are going up faster than prices, which is a massive cost of living boost. That's after only 8 months, after 14 years of absolute failure. What do they do? Interest rates 11%. Massive 22 million black hole in the economy. They crashed the economy. We're rebuilding Britain.
Mr. Speaker, he knows why we're having an emergency budget, because since the last one, since the Chancellor delivered her budget in October, growth is down, borrowing is up, and she has destroyed business confidence. Does the Prime Minister now regret raising taxes on business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the OBR will present their numbers. There'll be a spring statement next week. But, Mr. Speaker, she still hasn't. We've got record investment into this country. Interest rates have been cut, and she talks about national insurance. We had to fill the 22 billion black hole that lay there. We've invested in the NHS, in schools and public services. We're pressing on with planning, with infrastructure and regulation. But I understand the Leader of the Opposition is straight talking, so perhaps she can help us with this. Is she going to reverse the next increase? If not, what's the point? If so, what other taxes is she raising to fill the hole? One way or the other.
You're in government. Speaker, the only black hole is the one that he is digging. He's shown absolutely no regret, but everybody knows the Chancellor has made a mistake. That is why they're having an emergency budget. Later today, Conservatives will vote to exempt hospices, pharmacies and care providers from her national insurance rise. Will he, at the very least, support exempting these vulnerable services from his jobs tax?
Prime Minister.
I noticed she didn't say they're going to reverse the national insurance rises. It's exactly what she wants all the benefits, but they can't say how they're going to pay them. She carps from the sideline, but can't make her mind up whether she supports or doesn't support national insurance rises. We've made provision for hospices, we've made provisions for charities, but we had to secure the economy. We had to fill the £22 billion black hole that they disgracefully left.
Mr. Speaker, he hasn't made these provisions. He keeps talking about budget benefits. Unemployment is not a benefit. Businesses closing are not benefits. I asked him whether he would exempt hospices, even children's hospices, from the jobs tax. He did not answer that question. His MPs know that this could affect end-of-life care. So I will ask the same question again. Will he exempt hospices from paying his jobs tax?
Mr. Speaker, we've already invested £100 million for adult and children's hospices, an additional £26 million in funding for the Children's Hospices grant, but we can't get away with what we were doing in that budget, the root cause, which was fixing the economy they left so badly damaged, a £22 billion black hole. Perhaps you start the next question with an apology.
Mr. Speaker, I remember when he made... They want me to answer questions, then we can swap sides. I remember when he made that announcement. He's forgotten because the money he's referring to for hospices is for buildings. It is not for the salaries hit by the jobs tax. As St Helena Hospice in Colchester said, we cannot use this funding for salaries, which is where we need urgent help. Why is the Prime Minister not listening to hospices?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've already set out the position in relation to hospices. She says that she wants to swap sides. I mean, heaven forbid. After 14 years of breaking everything, we're getting on with the job of fixing it, and all she can do is cart from the sidelines with absolutely no policy.
Mr. Speaker, winter fuel payments have been snatched. The jobs tax is hammering everyone from business to charities. The Chancellor promised a once-in-a-Parliament budget that she would not come back for more. And in that budget, she said there will be no extension of the freeze in income tax thresholds. Ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat? Mr. Speaker, ahead of the emergency budget, will he repeat the commitment that she made?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she's got such prescriptive questions, she can't actually adapt them to the answers that I'm giving. I mean, Mr. Speaker, I think she now calls herself a Conservative realist. Well, I'm realistic about the Conservatives. The reality is they left open borders and she was the cheerleader. They crashed the economy, mortgages went through the roof, the NHS was left on its knees and they hollowed out the armed forces. This government has already delivered 2 million extra NHS appointments, 750 breakfast clubs, record returns of people who shouldn't be here and a fully funded increase in our defence spending. That is the difference that a Labour government makes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A lady came to see me recently who needed help. She had a disability. It meant that her children have to help her cut up her food. They have to help her wash beneath the waist. They have to supervise her as she goes to the toilet. Under the Tory welfare system, we were able to get that lady on PIP. Under the Prime Minister's new proposed system, she will get zero. Nothing. And after 14 years of the Tory government, and many of us wanting to see the back of them, can the Prime Minister answer one question? What was the point if Labour are going to do this?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've lived with the impact of a disability in our family through my mother and brother all my life. I do understand the human impact of this, but the current system is morally and economically indefensible, and we're right to reform it, and nobody should be defending the broken status quo. We are proceeding on three principles: that if you can work, you should work. If you need help into work, the state should help you, not hinder you. And if you can never work, you must be supported and protected. They are the right principles, but we can't leave the current system as it is.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks on Ukraine and Gaza? And can I also pay tribute to Group Captain John Paddy Hemingway and all our heroes from the Battle of Britain? I know that members across this House will, like me, have heard from GPs, dentists, community pharmacists and care homes who are all deeply worried about the impact of the national insurance rise on the services they provide to patients. That's why the House of Lords passed a Liberal Democrat amendment to exempt NHS and care providers. That amendment comes before this House this afternoon, but we're hearing worrying reports that the Prime Minister will order Labour MPs to vote against it. Will the Prime Minister reassure this House and patients across the country that these reports are not true?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by pointing out that because of the changes we made at that budget, we were able to put record amounts of money into our National Health Service, and vitally important that we did so. And it isn't right to simply oppose the measures we had to take to raise the money and at the same time say as the honourable gentleman does, that he wants the benefits of the increase in funding to the NHS. The two can't sit together. We have already invested an additional £3.7 billion of funding into social care, including £880 million to increase the social care grant. So we are taking steps. But the basic point remains, which is we can't make the investment into the NHS if we don't raise the money. And you can't simply oppose any raising of money and at the same time welcome the money into the NHS.
Say it, Davey.
By that reply, and I hope he and the Chancellor will think about taking money from the NHS ahead of the spring statement and reverse it. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the issue of illegal hair coursing. Criminal gangs are terrorising rural communities across our country, from Cambridgeshire to Devon, from Oxfordshire to Wiltshire. Men in balaclavas are threatening and abusing farmers as these criminals tear across their fields in 4x4s. Farmers are warning that it's only a matter of time before someone is killed. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that we must act urgently against this appalling criminality? Our calls for a comprehensive rural crime strategy so we can not just stamp out hair coursing, but keep our rural communities safe from all crime.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this important issue, and it is a matter of deep concern. We've already developing a rural crime strategy, but we'll happily work with him and others to develop it further.
Lawrence Turner.
Northfield are deeply concerned about the scourge of knife crime, and I pay tribute to the professionalism of West Midlands Police for their response to these horrendous attacks. But there are still 1,200 fewer police officers and PCSOs in the force than in 2010. A new bid has been submitted to the Home Office for 150 more officers. Will he look at this issue so that the police can do more to keep our streets secure and safe?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I join him in commending the West Midlands Police for keeping his community safe? We are doubling our investment to £200 million towards the recruitment of 13,000 neighbourhood police, giving every community a named officer to help tackle violent crime. And we're currently working through bids with forces to ensure that we do so, and I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant policing minister to discuss.
Conor Denyer.
Mr. Speaker, we have a deeply unfair, unequal economic system where vast numbers of people are struggling, yet billionaires are getting richer and richer. Does the Prime Minister really think that the way to tackle this is to put the onus onto older people, children, and now sick and disabled people, rather than on the shoulders of the super rich with a wealth tax, those people who could most easily afford to pay? And if the Prime Minister uses the phrase difficult choices in his answer, please will he specify difficult choices for whom?
Well,
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do have a proportional tax system, and we have raised tax on the wealthiest under this government. But her advice would count for a bit more if their manifesto hadn't been a recipe for £80 billion of extra borrowing. That is to do exactly what Liz Truss did to the economy, and that doesn't help any of the people that she's claiming to support.
Mohammed Yazid.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the government's ambitious growth plans for Oxford-Cambridge Arc, which promises to reverse years of decline and transform the eastern region by driving prosperity, creating jobs, and delivering much-needed housing. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that the crowning achievement of this plan would be the establishment of a world-class theme park in Bedford Borough? It would transform our local economy, create thousands of new jobs and opportunities, and elevate Bedford as a national hub for leisure and tourism.
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right to raise this important project, which we are working for. And it's vital that we do unleash the potential of the Oxford-Cambridge corridor and, of course, Bedford by generating growth, jobs and opportunities. And we're doing that by speeding up the delivery of new infrastructure projects, slashing red tape and getting Britain building.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents have approached me about the inadequate treatment of young people's eating disorders.
This year, despite a 30% increase in referrals, the majority of ICBs have cut real-term funding. Currently, as I've seen in my own family and my weekly surgeries, those who reach out for treatment are told, in effect, come back when you're thinner, increasing both the human and financial costs of treatment. Does the Prime Minister agree timely intervention is critical, and will he meet with me to discuss how we fund it?
Prime Minister.
Well, he's right. Too many people with eating disorders are not getting the treatment that they need. The NHS is expanding eating disorder treatment services with a focus on accessing treatment earlier and closer to home. And we're also providing access to specialist mental health professionals in every school. And I'll make sure that he's kept updated.
Paul Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour's flagship crime and policing bill is designed to tackle the rise in antisocial behaviour, theft and shoplifting that has occurred under the Tories. It grants police the power to confiscate disruptive off-road vehicles. This measure will tackle the scourge of off-road bikes in my constituency. Does the Prime Minister agree that we are the party of law and order and that we are fulfilling our commitments?
Mr. Speaker, it's totally unacceptable for anyone to feel intimidated or unsafe due to the actions of reckless and selfish individuals. Whatever the vehicle, our bill gives police forces stronger powers to seize them immediately and put a stop to antisocial behaviour. That's our plan for change in action, making our streets and communities safer.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years to get ready, they came into power with no plan to reform welfare. But now, in a panic because of their economic mismanagement, they're cutting benefits for disabled people without consulting them at all. It probably says in his folder that the High Court ruled the Conservatives' consultation was too short, but at least we consulted. They're not consulting at all. So will the Prime Minister explain why he is doing things to disabled people and not with them?
No, what it says in my favour is they had 14 years, including five with a majority of... They didn't need to consult, get on with it. They had a majority of 80 for the last 5 years. They're now carping on with some of their ideas. 14 years, and they didn't implement a single one. They simply broke the system. They're in no place to lecture other people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the charity Shelter, there are more homeless children in my city of Edinburgh than there are in the whole of Wales. That's an appalling legacy of 18 years of SNP government. Does the Prime Minister agree with me there should be no homeless children? And will he work with me, the Scottish Parliament and anyone who'll listen to end child homelessness in Scotland?
Well, the situation he describes an appalling indictment of the SNP record. The party opposite left record homelessness in England. The SNP record is equally shameful, a record number of children in temporary accommodation. Mr. Speaker, we're investing £1 billion to tackle homelessness, we're abolishing no-fault evictions and building 1.5 million new homes. Meanwhile, the SNP have cut their affordable housing budget. They've had the largest settlement since devolution. They've got the power, the money. Now it's time they started delivering.
Alison Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, I received an email from Santander informing me that both the Bognor Regis and the Rustington branches in my constituency are set to close, with 4 other bank branches shutting across the constituency in 2023 alone. The most vulnerable members of our society are being gradually cut off from essential banking services. Small cash-based businesses will also struggle to deposit their takings, faced with the added burden of travelling to Chichester or Worthing, making it even harder for them to operate. So what decisive action is the Prime Minister taking to guarantee that people and businesses in my constituency and across the country are not left without access to cash and vital banking services?
Mr. Speaker, we are rolling out 350 banking hubs across all communities, and I'll happily arrange for her to have a meeting with the Minister to discuss how that might affect her constituency.
Mr Speaker, thank you very much. Firstly, I welcome the Prime Minister's announcement of £200 million from the National Wealth Fund for the industrial future of Grangemouth. But today, I want to ask specifically about the workers facing redundancy. Given the assurances from the Prime Minister on the 18th of February and repeated by Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, as recently as the 4th of March, can the Prime Minister confirm that the guarantee given on 18 months pay protection for all of those workers losing their jobs due to the Grangemouth refinery closure will be honoured, including those shared services workers, and say how the payment can be claimed by all those affected?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, Petroenius have said that every employee made redundant will get 18 months full pay. The Project Willow report that's come out today says how we can support a sustainable industrial future for Grangemouth, which is incredibly important, delivering jobs and economic growth. As he references, I've announced £200 million through the National Wealth Fund to secure the site's long-term future. And of course, that's backed by the £100 million Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal, which is training and the training guarantee to support workers into good jobs. They're all the actions that we were taking on this very, very important issue.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Today, the House of Lords considers the Infected Blood Compensation Scheme regulations, which diverge from the proposals of the inquiry report and the government response. The regulations introduce new exclusions, treat victims inconsistently and downgrade some previously agreed awards, such as that to my constituent Owen Saville. Will the Prime Minister remember the promise made to victims like Owen and think again?
Well, the victims of this scandal have suffered unspeakably, and I'm pleased that at the budget we set aside the £11.8 billion to compensate them in relation to this appalling scandal. I would gently point out that the party opposite was committed rightly to this compensation but didn't provide a single penny in the column to pay for it. The Infected Blood Compensation Authority has been established and began to make payments last year. Over £1 billion interim payments have been made, and we do remain completely committed to cooperating with the inquiry and acting on its recommendations.
Elise Midgley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Everyone is talking about Adolescence, the series by Knowsley's own Stephen Graham and Christine Tomarco. It highlights online male radicalisation and violence against girls. The creators of the show are calling for screenings in Parliament and schools to spark change. So will the Prime Minister back this campaign to counter toxic misogyny early and give young men the role models they deserve?
Prime Minister.
Yes, and at home we are watching Adolescence with our children. I've got a 16-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl, and it's a very, very good documentary to watch, or drama. This violence carried out by young men, influenced by what they see online, is a real problem. It's abhorrent, and we have to tackle it. We are putting in specialist rape and sexual offences teams in every police force, doing work on the 999 calls. But this is also a matter of culture that I think it's important that across the whole House we tackle this emerging and growing problem.
Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Liberal Democrats have long called for a UK-EU youth mobility scheme, and polling has repeatedly shown that the majority of Brits support this idea, including my constituents in Epsom and Ewell. A well-structured and controlled scheme would show that the government is serious about providing opportunities for young people and backing British business. So will the Prime Minister stop sitting on the fence and finally commit to a youth mobility scheme?
Well, Mr Speaker, we are working closely with our European colleagues and the EU in particular, and we are working to a reset of the relationship. We won't be returning to freedom of movement. I've made that repeatedly clear, but we're making good progress.
Orrin Edwards.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The previous government failed to properly support further and adult education over the last 14 years. And in contrast, the Prime Minister's personal commitment to technical qualifications has been encouraging. Last year's budget provided a welcome boost to some parts of the sector, but need and demand is outstripping available funding. Skills are crucial to the government meeting its missions to deliver economic growth, build 1.5 million homes, and to transition to a green economy. Can the Prime Minister provide reassurance that the funding model will be reviewed so that we won't see colleges having to turn people away who want to gain the skills that our country so desperately needs?
Prime Minister.
Well, she's right. Further education plays a critical role in giving young people the skills and confidence that they need, and of course the training we need for the future. We are investing £400 million on education for 16 to 19-year-olds this year, and our levy-funded growth and skills offer will create jobs in key industries, and I can assure her that the funding will deliver enough places for young people.
John Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Large spending announcements for defence would make you think that Britain is marching us to war, but the MOD is bimbling along with procurement systems better designed for peacetime. Will the Prime Minister use his good offices to bring British industry into this fight, and quickly?
Prime Minister.
Yes, but they did leave a bit of a mess that we are clearing up, having hollowed out our armed forces and having not made the necessary investment that we needed in our defence. We've announced the largest sustained increase since the Cold War of 2.5% by 2027 and 3% in the next Parliament, subject to economic circumstances. So yes, we are getting on with the job and clearing up the mess that they left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency, Stratford and Bow, has the greatest number of high-rise buildings with dangerous cladding in the country. On Friday, I visited Stratford Fire Station. Our brilliant local firefighters told me that 77 high-rise buildings in Newham and 165 high-rise buildings in Tower Hamlets are covered in hazardous materials, many of them deemed unsafe. Thousands of my constituents have been calling for justice for years. Can the Prime Minister tell me what the government is doing to ensure that private developers are held to account for the dangerous cladding on the high-rises that they have built?
Prime Minister.
Well, she's right. Remediation has been far too slow, and everybody deserves a safe and secure home. We've signed a contract with 54 major developers who will pay for or fix over 1,700 buildings, and we're accelerating that progress. We will take tough action against those who evade their responsibilities. We will recover taxpayers' funds and make sure those responsible pay up and fix unsafe buildings quickly.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to this chamber, Mr. Speaker, every week to ask sensible questions, and I expect sensible answers. But all I get is glazed expressions and waffle, and from the opposite benches. So Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister a very simple question on behalf of all the net zero sceptics. If we became net zero tomorrow, by how much would it reduce the Earth's temperature by? Simple question.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, net zero is of course not easy, but it's a huge opportunity to boost our growth, our jobs and our economy. And so he knows my views on that. But you know, he complains that have better ideas if they stop fawning over Putin. And I understand the member for Clacton wants to be Prime Minister. He can't even lead a party that fits in the back of a taxi.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 in 5 disabled people in social housing and 1 in 3 disabled private renters live in inaccessible housing. One of my constituents with severe fibromyalgia and PTSD lives on a first-floor flat with no lift access. As we build the 1.5 million new homes that this country needs, will the Prime Minister ensure that they are built to be accessible and adaptable so disabled and older people can live independently for generations to come?
Prime Minister.
She's right. Everybody needs to be able to access a home that is suitable for them and meets their needs. The planning rules, Mr. Speaker, already mean councils must consider the needs of disabled people when planning new homes. We will go further, setting out our policies on accessible new homes very shortly, and we're boosting the Disabled Facilities Grant by £172 million, helping more people make vital improvements and live independent lives.
Lee Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite Ukraine being the victim in Russia's illegal aggression, President Zelensky has shown leadership to his people by committing to the US plans for a ceasefire. However, it's clear that Putin is playing for time and still carrying out daily attacks on Ukrainian people. So, Prime Minister, is now not the time to take those frozen Russian assets, to seize them, to give them to the Ukrainian people, to strengthen their hand at the negotiating table, and to punish Russian aggression.
Minister.
Well, on both points, I spoke to President Zelensky last night following the discussions yesterday to discuss the way forward. On the wider question of the assets, look, it's complicated, but we're working with others to see what is possible, but it isn't straightforward.
Ewan Steinbank.
Mr Speaker, the release of Project Willow today is a step forward in securing good jobs and an industrial future for Grangemouth. However, the Government needs to work at pace to ensure the recommendations in Willow are acted upon. Can the Prime Minister outline what steps he will be taking to ensure barriers to a rapid transition at Grangemouth are removed and investment is progressed as quickly as possible?
Well, I'm very grateful for him for raising Grangemouth again the second time in this session, and that's because it's centrally important. He'll have heard what I had to say about the projects that we're looking at to ensure the long-term future of Grangemouth, the interim measures that are being taken, and of course the £200 million of the Wealth Fund that I announced just a few weeks ago.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister and I disagree about much. The family farm tax, the NI jobs tax, and the cut in winter fuel payments, but we surely agree that the common good is built on public order. Crossbows in the hands of killers cost lives. They cost the lives of 3 innocent women last year. Now, the previous government launched a consultation over a year ago on the regulation of crossbows, their sale and use, and we've heard nothing since. They are as powerful as guns, as silent as knives. Will the Prime Minister agree for one of his ministers to come to the House before Easter to give us a clear instruction about what the government intends to do before any more lives are lost?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this, and he's right to do so. It's a shocking issue, and the case he refers to is a truly shocking case. I think that's agreed across the House. We are working on this, and I'll make sure that he gets an update to ensure that he's across the detail of what we're doing.
Final question, Diane Abbott.
Most members of this House will be aware that the welfare system can be a nightmare to navigate and does indeed need reform. But could we have less of this rhetoric about his £5 billion package of disability benefit so-called reform being moral? There is nothing moral about cutting benefits for what may be up to 1 million people. This is not about morality. This is about the Treasury's wish to balance the country's books on the back of the most vulnerable and poor people in this society.
Mr Speaker, she's a passionate advocate and has been for a long time on this issue, and I pay tribute to that. But as she rightly acknowledges, the current system is broken. And this is where I disagree with her. I think 1 in 8 young people not in employment, training or education, that's 1 million young people. I think that's a moral issue, Mr Speaker, because all the evidence suggests that someone in that situation at that stage of their life is going to find it incredibly difficult ever to get out of that level of dependency. That cuts across the opportunity and aspiration. It's the root of my values and Labour values about how we take working people forward. So I do see it as a moral issue. I'm not going to turn away from that. I am genuinely shocked that 1 million people, young people, are in that position, and I'm not prepared to shrug my shoulders and walk past it.
That completes Prime Minister's question. Point of order, Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Shadow Minister for Women and the member for East Grinstead and Uckfield has just at the dispatch box before PMQs stated that Imam Adam Kelwick posted that he prayed for victory of Hamas over Israel, which was totally inaccurate. He made absolutely no mention in the post she referred to or of Hamas or against Israel, which had been added wrongly by the Shadow Minister. He in fact made a call for prayers of peace. The truth is, Adam has spent years working on countering extremism and even uniting people through food and conversations when rioters came to attack his local mosque in Liverpool last year. I would ask that the member correct the record and remind her that she should have made such statements outside of the House. There would have been possible legal action. What advice could Mr. Speaker give to members to ensure that they do not abuse parliamentary privilege for slandering people?
Well, first of all, I'm not responsible for honourable members' questions or ministers' answers or shadow ones. I don't want to extend the question, but I can assure the Table Office will be able to advise her on how to pursue this matter, and I'm sure, without doubt, it is on the record and that people will reflect on that. Thank you. Right, let us move on. We come to the 10-minute rule motion. Alistair Carmichael.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about the Groceries Code Adjudicator, to require coordination between the Groceries Code Adjudicator and the Agricultural Supply Chain Adjudicator, to make provision about public procurement in respect of British food products, to make provision about the labelling of food products, and for connected purposes. I also remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Mr. Speaker, in March 1917, at the height of the First World War, then Prime Minister David Lloyd George sent a letter to an Orkney farmer, Charles Patterson. He wrote, "In the nation's interests, I urge you, at whatever personal sacrifice, to overcome all obstacles, to throw your fullest energies into the work, and to influence and encourage all who assist you, so that every possible acre shall be sown." At that time, there was no question at the heart of government about the vital importance of farmers in the Isles and across the country. In the centuries since, farmers have continued to play their part in supplying the nation's table, but their incomes have stagnated. The market for agricultural produce in the UK has not been a free market since at least the end of the Second World War. Successive governments have intervened through the payment of public subsidies to farmers, initially in the name of food security and more recently in the name of cheap food for consumers. That intervention has over the years distorted the market and allowed a range of unfair practices to be hardwired into the system. As a consequence, the market today has a handful of behemoth retailers, the supermarkets at the top, hundreds of thousands of farmers at the bottom, and a variety of processors, distributors and others in the middle. Everyone takes their cut, and then, at the end of it all, the farmers get whatever's left. The power imbalance between the supermarkets at the top and farmers at the bottom is more pronounced than any other market that I can think of, and it is well documented that those at the top who have the power wield it to their own advantage. Mr. Speaker, the extensive debate that we've had in this House in recent months has laid bare the shocking truth about the lack of profitability in farming. Just last week, a new report from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission found that real incomes for farmers have stayed stock still for the past 50 years. Shortly after the autumn budget, a group of younger farmers in my constituency came to see me and brought with them their farm accounts. They were despondent in pointing out to me that their businesses earned a net profit of 0.7% on their capital. They were not even much cheered when I pointed out that they were doing better than many of their contemporaries, as DEFRA figures say the average return is as low as 0.5%. One of those farmers was the great-grandson of Charles Patterson, a seventh-generation farmer who works the same land as his great-grandfather. You really could not ask for a better illustration of the shift in priorities of our governments over the past 100 years. Mr. Speaker, this cannot go on. Farmers are seeing a rapid withdrawal of funding support. In England, the accelerated withdrawal of basic payments, followed by the closure without notice last week of the sustainable farming incentives, has left many farms desperately worried about the viability of their businesses. Elsewhere in the United Kingdom, the removal of the ring fence of money given to devolved administrations for agricultural payments leaves farmers feeling they are vulnerable to adverse change. That is why this market now needs direct and meaningful intervention. Without it, we risk losing domestic food production and any notion of food security. If, as the Prime Minister says, food security is national security, then his government should act urgently to allow our farmers to get a fair price for the food that they produce. I was in government when the Groceries Code Adjudicator was set up. I don't think that anyone believed that the GCA would be the last word in regulation of the food supply chain, but we all took the view that it was better to have something than to have nothing. 12 years on from its creation, the limitations of the adjudicator are apparent for all to see. The office has fewer than 10 staff, all seconded from other public bodies, and it is funded by a levy on supermarkets. To expect an operation of that size to take on some of the largest retail businesses in the country is laughable. It's hardly surprising, then, that businesses supplying supermarkets are reluctant to make complaint, especially when the office itself has not issued a single fine in the entirety of its existence. Such cases as are pursued end up with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Since publicising my bill, I have spoken to a number of producers who have told me about their experience at the hands of supermarkets. Just yesterday, I spoke to a businessman who had been a supplier of Brussels sprouts to a large supermarket. His company had, on the basis of undertakings made to it by the retailer, invested significantly in their business, borrowing £400,000 to build a state-of-the-art packing facility. In the year 2022 to 23, this one supermarket accounted for 47% of their business. Then, in February 2023, they were told by the supermarket that their supply was no longer wanted for that season. For that business, the news was a hammer blow, and despite it being a prima facie breach of the Groceries Code, Supply Code of Practice, the GCA initially declined to intervene. Now, I would love to say that this was an isolated incident, but the GCA annual survey conducted by YouGov suggests that it is not. 42% of suppliers would not raise issues because they believed that the retailer would find out and there would be consequences. The experiences that they describe include delisting without reasonable notice, undisputed invoices not being paid according to agreed terms, retrospective changes to supply agreements, running a promotional activity at the supplier's expense, not the retailer's, and much more. Practice among supermarkets shows a wide variety of behaviours. 7 of the retailers were judged to have improved or at least stayed the same, with Sainsbury's coming out on top with a net improvement score of 10.34%. Unfortunately, 7 others, including Home Bargains, Asda, Tesco, Ocado, Iceland, Morrisons and Amazon, were scored as having worsened by varying degrees, with Amazon's performance being judged to have worsened by a whopping 21.38%. Amazon was also scored as having complied with the code consistently or mostly only 46.96% of the time. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's Daily Telegraph reported that Asda was threatening a price war in order to regain market share that they had lost in recent years. For farmers, that is a chilling prospect. If supermarkets are about to embark on a race to the bottom, then we can be pretty sure that it will be farmers, not company executives or shareholders, who will be expected to take the hit. Mr. Speaker, it is not for us in Parliament to pick a winner in a fight between supermarkets, but they should know that we are watching. And any supermarket that thinks it can rebuild its balance sheet on the back of Britain's farmers might find themselves in front of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, they had better have some good answers when they get here. My bill has support from MPs across the political parties. It's sponsored by members from the Liberal Democrats, Labour, Conservative, Plaid Cymru, SNP, Green and Democratic Unionist Party. It also has wide geographical support. It has sponsors from Shetland to Cornwall and across the 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom. I am grateful for the support I've received from the farming unions, the Country Land and Business Association, Scottish Land and Estates, the Senate Farmers Association and the Countryside Alliance. This is a quite remarkable coalition of people who all understand that if we fail to act now, then before too long there may be no industry left to protect. Charles Patterson's family in Orkney is still working the same land to this day. And if we want to keep farming communities alive for generations to come, however, we need to act now to make it happen. That is why, Mr. Speaker, this bill is necessary and why I seek the leave of the House today to introduce it.
The right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the right honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Mr. Speaker, Jane Kirkham, Sarah Bull, Jenny Riddle-Carpenter, Charlie Dewhurst, Sarah Dyke, Anne Davis, Seamus Logan, Ellie Chowns, Jim Shannon, obviously, David Chadwick, Tim Farron, and myself.
No punch without Judy. Alistair Carmichael.
Food Products, Market Regulation and Public Procurement Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, 20th of June, Mr. Speaker.
Friday, the 20th of June. When's the committee sitting? Right. Let us move to the programme motion to be moved formally. Question is, as on the order paper, as many of the opinions say aye. Aye. Contrary, no, the ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
National Insurance Contributions, Secondary Class 1 Contributions Bill. Consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now.
No. Before we move to the consideration of the Lord's amendments, I can confirm that Lord's amendments 1 to 20 engage Commons financial privilege. Having careful consideration of Lord's Amendment 20, I am satisfied that it would impose a charge on the public revenue which is not authorised by a money resolution passed by this House on the 3rd of December 2024. In accordance with paragraph 3 of Standing Order number 78, the amendment will therefore be deemed to be disagreed to and is not available for debate. We will begin with government motion to disagree with Lord's Amendments 1, with which we will consider the other government motions to disagree with the Lord's Amendments listed on the selection paper. I call the Minister to move the motion to disagree with Lord's Amendment 1. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to consider the Lord's amendments to the National Insurance Contributions Secondary Class Contributions Bill. I'd like to start, Mr. Speaker, by thanking members of both Houses for their careful scrutiny and consideration of this bill. I'd like to place on record my particular thanks to the Financial Secretary, Lord Livermore, for his invaluable support and for leading the bill so expertly through the other place. Now, during this bill's consideration in the other place, 21 amendments were made, 20 of which we will seek to address here today. But before I address these amendments directly, Mr. Speaker, let me remind both Houses of the context for this bill. When we entered government, we inherited a fiscal situation that was completely unsustainable. We have had to take difficult but necessary decisions to repair the public finances and rebuild our public services. The measures in this bill represent some of the toughest decisions that we have had to take as a result. In order to restore fiscal responsibility and get public services back on their feet, we needed to raise revenue, including through the measures that this bill will introduce. And many of the amendments from the other place put at risk the funding that this bill seeks to raise. So let me be clear. To support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises. And it is with that in mind that I will now turn to the first group of amendments. I'll give way.
The Minister giving way. He does talk about one of the a mission he's made is talking about growth, which is what the government's raison d'etre is. last week we found out that the economy actually shrank. Has he done any work to find out how much that point percentage drop has caused in terms of cost to the government? Because that's going to have a huge impact when we're discussing tax implications.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've set out to the honourable gentleman in a number of debates in recent weeks, the reason why we as a government had to take difficult but necessary decisions was to restore fiscal responsibility after the completely unsustainable situation that we inherited from the party opposite. And that fiscal responsibility, that economic stability, is essential for greater investment in the economy, which is the bedrock for growth, the growth that we are so determined to pursue. I'll give way.
The Minister for giving way. I wonder if you could outline how many billions the government will spend this year, what percentage 22 billion would be of that, and an additional question, if I can be so greedy, Mr. Speaker, is how much the flatlining of the economy has cost the government compared to that 22 billion, because I'll put it to the Minister that the impact of this NIC rise has been much greater than this mythical 22 billion alleged by the government.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not clear from the honourable gentleman's intervention whether he finally accepts the £22 billion black hole that we inherited when we took government, because I know several of his colleagues have sought to rewrite history, but the facts are there, that we inherited a completely unsustainable fiscal situation with pressures, a £22 billion black hole that we had to take difficult but necessary decisions to remedy. And it's important to do that because without the basic fiscal responsibility that a government should deliver, without that economic stability, the investment, which is the basis for growth, will not happen. I'll give way.
Honourable Minister for giving way. He spoke about facts. Is he aware of the fact that when the Labour Party won the election, the economy was growing? And is he aware of the fact that now the economy is falling?
Mr. Speaker, I am very aware of the fact that we inherited an economy and a fiscal situation in a mess that was completely unsustainable and that it was our duty as a government to address. No responsible government could have let things carry on as they were. With the fiscal situation in the way it was when we inherited, no responsible government could have let that carry on. And that is why we had to take the action we did. I'm not going to give away. I'm going to make some progress. I've given away several times already. But that is why we had to take those decisions, Mr. Speaker, to put the fiscal responsibility back at the heart of government, to return economic stability to the public finances, and to have that basis for the investment on which we can grow the economy and put more money in people's pockets. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will turn to the first set of Lord's amendments, which I will discuss together, namely 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13, as they relate to the NHS and social care providers. Mr. Speaker, these amendments seek to maintain the employer national insurance contribution rates and thresholds at their current level for NHS commissioned services, including GPs, dentists, social care providers and pharmacists, as well as those providing hospice care. As honourable members in both houses will know, as a result of the measures in this bill and wider budget measures, the NHS will receive an extra £22.6 billion over 2 years, helping to deliver an extra 40,000 elective appointments every week. Primary care providers, that is general practice, dentistry, pharmacy and eye care, are important independent contractors who provide nearly £20 billion worth of NHS services, and every year the government consults with general practice and pharmacy sectors. I'll give way.
Minister, thank you very much for your answers to the questions that everyone has asked. One of the questions that comes out of my constituent on a regular basis is the one about the GP surgeries. The national insurance contributions will hit them immensely. They've told me they have a choice. The choice is to reduce staff and cut back on appointments. Ever mindful that the Minister has said 22 billion extra for NHS, but if impact upon the GP surgeries and the health clinics by reducing staff, reducing their capability of being able to produce and deliver a health service. Is this not really, Minister, a step down on what is offered on the ground in my constituency and indeed in all the constituencies? So would the Minister reconsider that in relation to the GP surgeries and the impact upon them in particular?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising the question of GPs and the funding and the support the government is providing to them, because the government is investing an additional £889 million in general practice, which brings the total spend on the GP contract to £13.2 billion in 25-26. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the biggest increase in over a decade, and the changes to the contract will improve services for patients and help make progress towards the government's health mission, shifting from analogue to digital, sickness to prevention, and from hospital to community care, as set out in the Prime Minister's plan for change. So that support for GPs is an essential part of what the budget, including the measures which we're debating in relation to national insurance, delivers. I'll give way.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. In my constituency of Horsham, Age UK have told me that the employer's NICS rise will cost them £50,000 a year. Would the Minister agree that it is impossible to improve the public sector by taxing the public sector?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we inherited public services that needed urgent support. We inherited public services that were on their knees, and part of the reason why we took those difficult but necessary decisions at the budget last October was, of course, to restore fiscal responsibility, but also to get public services back on their feet. And this is not just about public services and the services that people across the UK enjoy. It's also about making sure that we have that stability for economic growth. Because if you haven't got a health service that works well, you haven't got a healthy population who can go to work. If you haven't got a transport system that works well, people can't get to work. And so that investment in public services, getting them back on their feet after 14 years of the party opposite being in control, is not only essential for what people in the UK experience, but also to make sure we can have that economic growth which will put more money in people's pockets. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to make a little progress. I've spoken about GPs, Madam Deputy Speaker, but of course, alongside GPs, the Department for Health and Social Care has also entered into consultation with the Community Pharmacy England regarding the 24-25 and 25-26 Community Pharmacy contractual framework. The final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following this consultation.
The National Pharmacy Association announced for the first time ever in 104 years that they are planning action by reducing services because of the implications of the budget. But one of their requests is the release of an independent report commissioned by NHS England on the future funding of pharmacies. Now that the government is in charge of NHS England, would he speak to his health colleagues to release that report so that before the consultations all finish, so that actually the public and the pharmacies can see exactly what the financial situation of that independent report will be?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and obviously reports which are in relation to work the Department for Health is carrying out is a subject for ministers in that department to answer. But in terms of the funding that I'm speaking to today, as I said, the final funding settlement will be announced in the usual way following the consultation which is underway. Moving on, Madam Deputy Speaker, to dentistry. On dentistry, the NHS in England invests around £3 billion every year. NHS pharmaceutical, ophthalmic and dental allocations for integrated care systems for 25-26 have been published alongside NHS planning guidance. In relation to social care, the government has provided a cash increase in core local government spending power of 6.8% in 25-26, including £880 million of new grant funding provided to social care, funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing the adult social care sector.
Giving way. The figures that he is presenting, along with the answer that he gave to my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, similar to the Prime Minister, is money going into sectors that actually is not going to mitigate the national insurance rise. So will he actually confirm that sectors like hospices, social care, GPs, pharmacists will actually have some support and not tell us about money that's not going to help them with regard to this jobs tax that's coming in?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the various organisations or services that I'm talking about, whether that's GPs or pharmacies or organisations providing social care, obviously receive money from government. And the way in which those discussions take place is to consider pressures on the providers of those services in the round. And that's the way that the negotiations take place. Now, in terms of direct support for employer national insurance contributions, that obviously applies to central government, local government and public corporations, which is much the same way the previous government approached it under the Health and Social Care levy. In terms of the social care or GPs, as I've been outlining, pressures which they face are considered in the round in terms of their funding settlements. And as I said, in terms of social care, the £880 million of new grant funding is funding which can be used to address the range of pressures facing adult social care. I'll give way.
It sort of makes an interesting point, but if we look at children's hospices are going to be down by £4.9 million. Most of the funding for children's hospices doesn't come from the government, it comes from communities, it comes from people supporting them. Can the Minister at the dispatch box assure those children's hospices, such as Acorns, which is in the West Midlands, that they will not be down by that money that they're going to be losing through extra NI contributions, and that £4.9 million is going to be replaced by the government for children's hospices?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising the issue of hospices, and if I may set out the government's position in terms of hospices as they were referred to in some of the amendments we're considering today. In terms of hospices, the government recognises the vital role that they play in supporting people at the end of life and their families, and also recognises the range of cost pressures that the hospice sector has been facing over a number of years. We're supporting the hospice sector with a £100 million increase for adult and children's hospices to ensure they have the best physical environment for care, and £26 million of revenue to support children's and young people's hospices. Now, the £100 million will go towards helping hospices to improve their buildings, equipment and accommodation to ensure that patients continue to receive the best possible care. I'll give way.
To the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way, but I think the point that we are really trying to emphasise from this side of the House is that the government appears to be giving with one hand but taking away with the other. And the hospice sector is just one example of many sectors that are being adversely affected by the cruel tax that the government is placing on them.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said a few moments ago, the way in which the government supports central government, local government and public corporations, that is departments and other public sector employers, is the same way in which the previous government responded to the health and social care levy, and that is a standard way in which the government offers support in terms of employer national insurance costs. But if I'm speaking, I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress because I'm going to make some progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, because the government wants to shift healthcare out of hospitals and into the community to ensure patients and their families receive personalised care in the most appropriate setting. I'll give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and can I thank him for doing that. The Southern Area Hospice is located just outside my constituency. They have to raise £3.6 million per year, £300,000 per month. They are not government funded, as has been alluded. What reassurances can he give to those folks in the Southern Area Hospice who are currently using their services for end-of-life care that this government will do the right thing and will support our hospices by not including them in this national insurance contributions increase?
Well, I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I've explained how the government is approaching employer national insurance contributions and the support that the government offers for central government, for local government and for public corporations. And this is an established way of responding to employer national insurance contribution changes which the previous government did in terms of national insurance. I feel the Honourable Gentleman has been so persistent, he must have an amazing point to make, so I will give way to him. I wait with bated breath.
It's an amazing point, and I hope that the Honourable Gentleman will get it. Because at Prime Minister's question time, it was quite clear that the Prime Minister didn't get it. So let's now tell the real truth. The money that is being given by the government, taxpayers' money, to hospices, children's hospices, like Shooting Star, like Demelza House, is for buildings. The national insurance increase is hitting directly the people that do the work upon which very sick children depend. Why is that imposition being made?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the £100 million which the Honourable Member alluded to, is important funding to help hospices improve their buildings, their equipment, the accommodation to ensure that patients can receive the best care possible. As I also mentioned a few moments ago, Madam Deputy Speaker, there will be £26 million of revenue to support children and young people's hospices. And more widely, of course, with hospices being charities, the hospices provide support for charities, including hospices, through the wider tax regime, which is amongst the most generous in the world. And this includes tax reliefs for charities and their donors worth just over £6 billion for the tax year to April 2024. And finally, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, all charities, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, including hospices set up as charities, can benefit from the employment allowance, which this bill more than doubles from £5,000 to £10,500. And this will benefit charities of all sizes, and particularly the smallest. I'll give way.
But the Minister knows that this is funding for 1 year, mainly for buildings, as he has admitted. This is going to be a cost on hospices every single year going forward. So it will be something that's cumulative. It means that they have to ask their communities for more and more and more just to give that basic help. So is he going to commit to fund children's hospices by £4.9 million that they're taking off them every single year, or not? Yes or no?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the points that I was making just before I gave way to the Right Honourable Gentleman are recurrent features of the tax system. The support through the tax regime for charities and their donors, worth over £6 billion in April 2024, is a recurrent system, a feature of the system which happens in every year. The increase in the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500, which will benefit hospices set up as charities, is a permanent change. That is one that we're making through this bill to increase the employment allowance. I'm going to make a bit of progress. So I've given way quite. Sorry, is he intervening? Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think, as is evident to many members of this House, the Minister for the first time has found himself not able to answer some very straightforward questions from honourable members on this side of the House, which is the difference between the allocation of funding which is for capital and the allocation of money which is for current expenditures, and the impact that that difference will have on our hospices, on our children's hospices, on our GPs and others affected by Labour's jobs tax. I'm sure members in the House of Lords who brought this amendment back will also have noticed the fact the Minister hasn't been able to answer these questions. So prior to this going back to the House of Lords, will the Minister agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, to speak to the Chancellor or the Chief Secretary to get a clear answer to the questions that have been raised today about which money will be available for capital and which money will be available to offset the National Insurance charge increase?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sorry to hear the Right Honourable Gentleman, promoting you there. I'm sorry to hear the Honourable Gentleman felt that I was being unclear. I think I was being perfectly clear in the position. He may not agree with the position, as he's entitled to not do so in this chamber, but I think I was being very clear in that the way in which support works in direct response to the employer national insurance contribution changes is the government provides support directly to central government, local government and public corporations, so it's departments and other public sector employers, as was the case under his government, and when in relation to discussion around the health and social care levy, that does not apply to GPs, to dentists, to hospices and other organisations who we've been discussing today. The important point I was making, which I hope was clear to him and his colleagues on the other side of the House, is about the wider support which the government is providing to hospices, to the funding we're providing to GPs, the discussions we're having with other primary care providers. And that's the context in which this bill has to be seen, because the reason why we're able to take decisions around funding for public services is because of those difficult decisions that we took at the budget last year. And this bill implements one of those decisions. And it was noticeable, Madam Deputy Speaker, at Prime Minister's questions earlier today, that I think when the Prime Minister asked the Leader of the Opposition, whether she would reverse the national insurance rise that we are bringing in through this bill, she refused to commit to that. So I'm unclear exactly how. I'm unclear exactly what the opposition's position is, and I can hear one of the honourable gentlemen saying that he will update me in his speech later. I think, or I may have misheard him there, but I think I heard him say he will confirm later whether the opposition will reverse the national insurance change we're making or not. I look forward to that update.
Minister explain to the House how it is right, as it is, for the government to cover the extra national insurance in the public sector, for example, in hospital provision, but it is not right to do it at end-of-life care in a hospice. How can that circle be squared? That you cover the national insurance for those who are being treated, the hospitals which are treating people, but you won't cover it for the hospices which are seeing end-of-life care.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, in answer to the honourable gentleman's question, the fundamental principle here is about what organisations the government will support in response to the changes to national insurance contributions. And the approach the government is taking, which is in line with the previous government, the approach that they took in the health and social care levy, is that the government provides support for departments and other public sector employers for additional employer national insurance contributions. And as I said to the honourable gentleman, that means central government, public corporations and local government. Primary care providers are independent contractors and will therefore not be exempt from these changes. I'll give way one more time.
Thank you very much. Minister, the Minister makes the point that this is secondary for primary care providers. However, what he doesn't acknowledge is that those primary care providers, as I hear from dentists and community pharmacies and social care providers in my constituency of Bicester and Woodstock, still don't know how they will be compensated by the government. We are very close to the start of the tax year. These are small businesses which are providing critical primary care services into our communities. How can they operate when the Minister obfuscates and says other people might talk to them at a later stage about the money that they might receive? Would it not be easier for the Minister to accept the Liberal Democrat amendment from the House of Lords and clear up this matter today?
Well, for clarity, Madam Deputy Speaker, the response in regards of other primary care providers who are independent contractors is not for direct support in the way the government provides it for departments and other public sector employers. Those pressures which they will face are considered in the round alongside all of the other pressures which they face, and that's taken into consideration in the funding which is provided to them. So it's a different way of that solution being arrived at than the honourable gentleman suggested in his question. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, looking across the debate that we're having today, as I set out earlier, the revenue raised by the decisions in this bill will help to fund public services, including the NHS and other social care providers. And the proposals in these amendments would put much of that funding at risk. And so to support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending, or other tax rises on that point.
For giving way. What advice then would you be able to give to Thames Hospice and Alexander Devine Children's Hospice in Maidenhead, who are looking at a £300,000 and a £50,000 increase in bills respectively? Is he saying that they should be cutting services, or is he expecting our residents in our constituencies to raise more money for these hospices to give it directly back to the Chancellor?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and I clearly don't know the situation of that particular hospice, so I'm not going to give them direct advice about how to manage their operations. But more generally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the government's approach to providing direct support for departments and other public sector employers. And of course, it depends in terms of how hospice care is provided, because in many cases, integrated care boards are responsible for the commissioning of palliative and end-of-life care services to meet the needs of local populations. And so where hospices are commissioned by the NHS for their work, then contractual arrangements should be discussed with the integrated care board at a local level. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll give way one more time.
Minister for giving way. He's got a capital budget, he's got revenue budgets. This is a small amount of money, £4-5 million. Would he take away from this debate today and look at whether switching 4 or 5 million from the capital budget to the revenue budget and trying to open up that opportunity is something that would have merit and would really help these very vulnerable organisations?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the government's approach to supporting departments and other public sector employers with the changes to employer national insurance contributions. As I said earlier in remarks to his front bench, this is the same approach that his government took in relation to the health and social care levy. And we are talking about the pressures, the wider pressures that other organisations, be that GPs or hospices and so on, face, and what we can do to support them, and the processes through which they go to consider the pressures on them in the round. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made quite considerable number of points, I think, in relation to these amendments 1, 4, 5, 9 and 13. And in light of these points, I would urge the House to disagree with those amendments. I will now turn to other Lords' amendments, Madam Deputy Speaker, relating to charities and local government, including special educational needs transport. First, Amendments 2, 7, 12 and 16 seek to exempt charities from the changes to employer national insurance contributions rates and thresholds in this bill. The Government recognises the crucial role that charities play in our society. We recognise the need to protect the smallest charities, which is why we have more than doubled the employment allowance to £10,500, meaning that more than half of businesses, including charities, with national insurance liabilities either gain or see no change next year. As I previously noted, it is important to recognise that all charities can benefit from the employment allowance. As I've also previously noted, the Government provides wider support for charities via the tax regime, with tax relief to charities and their donors worth just over £6 billion for the tax year to April 2024. Again, Madam Deputy Speaker, the proposals in these amendments would put much of the funding this bill seeks to raise for public services at risk, and so to support these amendments is also to support higher borrowing, lower spending or other tax rises. I'll now turn to Amendments 3, 6, 11 and 15. I'll give way.
To the Minister giving way. After yesterday's announcement with regards to the benefit changes and benefit cuts, the Government have said they want to see more people going into work. Now, a lot of the support is delivered by charities to help people to get into work, so we're expecting more need for the charities. How are they likely to cope if they're being taxed with this further nix? Because they're going to look to reduce the services and the ability to provide. So there's going to be a gap in the market there. Could you explain how the Government intends to breach that gap?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for drawing attention to the very important reforms that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, set out in this House yesterday, a crucial part of getting people back into work. Now, of course, further details will be set out on interventions to help people back into work. We recognise that charities, in some cases, may provide that support, and that's why many of the elements of support within the tax regime for charities remain so generous. £6 billion for the tax relief for charities and their donors for the tax year to April 2024, through features which are continuing in the year which we're entering into. The employment allowance doubling from £5,000 to £10,500. As I said, that doubling, that more than doubling of the employment allowance will benefit all charities in this country. And so I think some of those changes that we've made to the employment allowance are ones which charities, particularly small charities, will benefit very directly from. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, sorry. Sorry, I was seeking to give way, but I thought you were going to intervene on me, Madam Deputy Speaker. Oh, right, yes, sorry, yes. I will in that case not take any more interventions, and I will make more speedy progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was going to address Amendments 3, 6, 11 and 15 because, Madam Deputy Speaker, these relate to employers who provide transport for children with special educational needs. Of course, in the budget and the recent provisional local government finance settlement, the Government announced £2 billion of grant funding for local government in 25-26, and this includes £515 million to support councils with the increase in employer national insurance contributions. That funding is not ring-fenced, and it is for local authorities to determine how to use that funding across relevant services and responsibilities. Turning very briefly to Amendments 8, 10, 14, 17, 18 and 19, which together seek to maintain the current thresholds for businesses employing fewer than 25 staff. Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to protecting the smallest businesses, the Government is taking action through this bill by, as I have already mentioned, increasing the employment allowance from £5,000 to £10,500. This means next year 865,000 employers will pay no national insurance at all, and more than half will see no change or gain overall from this package. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will address Amendment 21, which requires the Government to conduct assessments on the economic and sectoral impacts of this bill. As we've discussed previously in this place, the Government has already published an assessment of this policy in HMRC's Tax Information and Impact Note. This note sets out that as a result of the measures in this bill, around 250,000 employers will see their secondary Class 1 national insurance contributions liability decrease, and around 940,000 will see it increase. Around 820,000 will see no change. The OBR's economic and fiscal outlook also sets out the expected macroeconomic impacts of the changes to employer national insurance contributions. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope honourable and right honourable members will understand why we are not supporting these amendments from the other place. This bill makes some of the difficult but necessary decisions that we, as a government, have had to take to fix the public finances and to get public services back on their feet. The amendments from the other place require information that has already been provided, do not recognise other policies the government has in place, or, most seriously, undermine the funding this bill seeks to secure. I therefore respectfully propose that this House disagree to these amendments, and I urge all honourable and right honourable members to support the government in making that so.
This debate has to conclude within the 2 hours that it started. So other than the front benches, the back benches will only have a 6-minute time limit. The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 1, and I call the Shadow Minister, Gareth Davis.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise on behalf of the official opposition in support of Lords Amendments 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 10, 14 and 21. But before I dive into the detail, I want to get a little nostalgic, because 1 year and 6 days ago, I opened the second reading of the 2024 Conservative National Insurance Contributions Bill, which cut national insurance for some 29 million working people across the country. What a difference a year makes. At the end of my speech that day, I posed a simple question to the Shadow Minister, now Exchequer Secretary, that was really bugging me at the time. How are Labour going to pay for all of their many spending commitments? I asked specifically what taxes they will put up and call for them to just be straight with the British people. Alas, no straight answer was forthcoming. But now we know the answer, don't we? It's just a shame they only gave it to us after the general election. Madam Deputy Speaker, they promised not to raise national insurance. They promised that they were on the side of British business. They said that they would deliver economic growth. How's that going? But the fact is, this Chancellor is delivering a £25 billion tax rise on jobs across the country that will stifle growth, hold back British business, and harm public services. This is a Labour national insurance bill which will take the tax burden unbelievably to the highest level in history on the backs of working people. Now, today we're debating a series of amendments laid down and voted through in the other place with the aim of mitigating at least some of the damage to three vital parts of our economy and our communities. These are healthcare providers, charities, and small businesses. Lords Amendments 1, 3 and 4 seek to exempt care providers, NHS GP practices, NHS commissioned dentists, NHS commissioned pharmacists, providers of transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and charitable providers of health and social care, such as hospices, as we've been hearing about so far. This is because we have been warned that as a direct result of the national insurance tax hikes, we could see fewer GP appointments, reduced access to NHS dentistry, community pharmacies closing, adults and local authorities paying more for social care, and young working families being hit with even higher childcare costs. We have to avoid this.
All member for giving way. Can he state whether or not he reversed the national insurance tax change that we have, and indeed what spending he would cut on the other side to do so?
Well, I'm very grateful for the intervention. If he looks back on the record of the stages of this bill, we voted against it. If he looks at our record in government, he'll see that we cut national insurance, as I say, for 29 million people across the country. And as I have said so many times in this place, why are we even debating the fact that they've created an £8 billion quango in GB Energy? Why are they spending £7 billion on a rebrand of the UK Infrastructure Bank? Why are they spending £9 billion on giving up our sovereignty to Mauritius? Let's start with those discussions and then we can have a real debate. But Madam Deputy Speaker, Lord's Amendment 2 recognises the role that the voluntary sector plays in the provision of essential services by exempting charities with an annual revenue of less than £1 million from the national insurance rate. Those charities with an income of less than £1 million make up some 95% of registered charities. They undertake vital work in all of our communities, yet this Chancellor will force charity staff and volunteers across the sector to have to raise £1.4 billion more to cover this tax rise just next year alone. Supporting this amendment will save so many services currently provided by the third sector from being reduced or even removed altogether. Lord's Amendments 8, 10 and 14 seek to exempt the smallest businesses, those with fewer than 25 full-time employees, from the proposed cut to the threshold at which an employer is required to pay second-class 1 national insurance.
Will the Honourable Member give way?
Of course.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way, and he mentioned small businesses. Local hairdressers in my constituency of Chichester have been in touch with me to say that with the difficult economic picture, these NICS rises will mean that this year they won't be able to take on apprentices. So does the Honourable Member agree with me that this NICS rise is not just a tax on business, it's actually a tax on education as well? Yeah.
Absolutely. The profound impact of this tax is not appreciated, I think, if I'm being fair, is not appreciated by the Labour front bench. And the Honourable Lady points out yet another area, tax on education. I could talk about universities and the impact on them as well.
Would you give way?
Of course.
Do you think does he think the government has assessed the loss of tax revenue as a result of this measure? In North Yorkshire, almost all of the jobs that would have been created over the coming year are now being repressed within these small businesses and leading to a loss of income for the Exchequer.
Answer it simply, I don't think they did before announcing this tax rise, but I think as we look at plummeting business confidence, if we look at declining economic growth and forecasts that are consistently downgraded for economic growth, the profound impact, as I was saying before, on businesses and economic growth is clear for all to see. Go on then, yes.
Now is a moment. I listened carefully to your answer to my honourable friend's question about what you would cut in or if this was to be reversed, which you haven't been clear about if you would, but I listened carefully to the answer. And what I heard you say was you talked... Sorry. I am so sorry. And what I heard the Shadow Minister say was that he would... what I heard the Shadow Minister say is referring to GB Energy and also to the National Wealth Fund. So what I would really like to understand in the Shadow Minister's future remarks is the Shadow Minister really saying that he wants to reverse record levels of investment in energy infrastructure and innovation jobs and record levels of investment in jobs across this country to stabilise our economy into the future?
Be reminded that interventions should not be short speeches, and she's absolutely right. Looking at the chair should helpfully prevent her from saying the word "you" repeatedly. Catherine.
I think the problem with that intervention is the chairman of GB Energy himself disagrees with the proposed number of jobs that it supposedly will be creating. But I've set out very clearly what we would some of the things of what we would do differently and the choices that we would make that are different to the choices that this Labour government are making. Madam Deputy Speaker, when we talk about small businesses and the impact on businesses as a whole of this national insurance tax increase, the Minister and other members opposite incorrectly suggest that only the largest businesses will be forced to pay this jobs tax. But as I've told them consistently at every stage of this debate, that is simply not the case. A village butcher, a high street hair salon, community pharmacies, these are not what most people would regard as large businesses. Yet businesses like these will be hit. If the government really wants to ensure that our smallest businesses are exempt from at least part of the damaging tax, they should support the Lord's amendments today.
Will the Honourable Gentleman give way? Yes. I thank the Honourable friend for giving way, and I sort of look across the chamber at the Minister, and, you know, we know he's having to defend the undefendable, really. He's sort of got a certain Matt Hancock about him in how he does it with a zeal. But he does it... sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. But would the Shadow Minister agree with me that actually the people who are paying for these increases are taxpayers? They're people who are working hard. Because I was talking to a manufacturing business in my constituency who are going to give their employees a 4.5% increase and now can only afford to give them a 2% increase. This is coming out of the pockets of hard-working people.
Members should not be reminded the language should be respectful at all times.
The jungle awaits the Minister, clearly. He is absolutely right. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. And in fact, the OBR have demonstrated clearly in their analysis that 76% of this tax increase will be passed on to working people, a manifesto breach if ever I saw one. Yeah. But not only that, the IFS have made clear that it isn't just working people that this will have an impact on. It's the lowest paid. It is the most lowest paid the least paid in our country that will be paying for this. And I think, again, that is an underappreciated and under-commented fact from the party opposite.
Well, it's worse than that, isn't it? Because the money that's being paid to bail out Demelza House Children's Hospice, Shooting Star Children's Hospice, is being generously donated by people who've already paid tax. So those working people are effectively being taxed twice on the money that they are generously giving to support some of the most needy children in this country in terms of health. Is that not absolutely appalling?
I'll just leave it with yes, it is. He's exactly right. They are giving with one hand, they're giving a small amount with one hand and taking a larger amount with the other. But the bottom line is it's all taxpayer money. Yeah. It is a double tax on those people who are now facing the brunt of this. I'll just make some progress if you allow me, and then I'll give way in a bit. This tax, purely and simply, is a financial penalty. That's how I look at it. On 940,000 businesses. And on average, the analysis shows that this is going to cost businesses £26,000 per year per employer. Not content with ruining the future of the immoral family farm tax, the Chancellor wants to hammer farmers today too with this bill. The Chancellor is going to make pubs and cafes and restaurants stump up more to cover her jobs tax without regard of the impact on our high streets or the communities that they serve. She's going to squeeze the creative industries from theatres to film producers in a desperate attempt to keep this circus on the road. It's crucial that we understand the impact this bill will have. It's why Lord's Amendment 21 requires the Chancellor to carry out a review of the impact of this bill within 6 months on the sectors I've already described, but also on farming, creative industries, hospitality, retail, and universities.
I thank him for giving way. I mean, he mentions cafes. I've raised Basil's Cafe and Tunbridge before in the House on exactly this point. They now inform me that they're having to put their prices up because of the NIC rises. Does the Shadow Minister think that we're actually going to see a bump in the inflation figures as a result of this tax?
The honourable gentleman for his intervention. I'll remind the House that inflation has gone from 2% to 3% already under this Labour government. In fact, the OBR scored the budget, the Halloween budget, as being inflationary. And he is right. When these tax rises hit, they will be passed on. And they will be passed on through higher prices, which inevitably, I hope not, but will inevitably put pressure on inflation. But it's the combination of factors in addition on businesses that I think is not always appreciated as well on cafes. It's the national living wage going up, which we on this side have welcomed. We implemented it, but it's the context in which that is going up, with national insurance on the rise, with business rates relief for hospitality businesses and high streets reduced from 70% to 40%. All of these things are compounding the impact on cafes like the honourable gentleman in his constituency that will be devastating and will inevitably lead to job freezes or job losses, which I'll come on to. Madam Deputy Speaker, from healthcare to charities to SMEs, I've made the consequences clear right from the start of this bill in the House. And today, the government really does have one more chance to change course. Because what many people across the country want to know is, what is this for? We were told that it was a one-off tax rise to fix the foundations of the economy. We were told that there would be no more tax rises after this. And yet we find ourselves just a week away from an emergency budget with speculation rife that other taxes may have to rise because the Chancellor will not meet her own new fiscal rules. Some are suggesting that Labour will break another pre-election promise and not unfreeze the income tax thresholds in 2028, but rather extend the freeze to pay down their new debts. This surely cannot be true. The Minister himself gave me his personal assurance in this House that income tax thresholds would be unfrozen from 2028.
Not looking you in the eye.
I'd like the Minister to reconfirm that promise to me today to end that speculation. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is vital context for members as we consider the amendments today. If more tax rises will be needed, if the original justification for this bill is now void, then why should we stomach their terrible consequences? Why should Labour MPs have to go out and defend this to their constituents? Why should we allow the government to still punish the sectors which the amendments before us seek to protect? In fact, why must we stand here and see this entire bill implemented at all? Because one impact that hits every sector of our economy is the impact on jobs. Just yesterday, we heard Labour talk about the importance of lifting people out of welfare and getting them back into work. They are right to do that. As Conservatives, we know the dignity of work, the security of a regular paycheck is what lifts us up as a country and lifts families out of poverty. But the tragedy is that this bill has caused so much concern and so much uncertainty that employment is already declining in anticipation of its passage. And the OBR tell us that it will depress workforce participation for years to come. Put simply, this government is cutting welfare to boost employment, while at the same time boosting taxes, which will cut jobs. No wonder business confidence has completely and utterly nosedived. It is inexplicable and entirely avoidable. The Minister,
He says it's inexplicable, and I think, and I agree, on the face of it, it is. But isn't one possible explanation for the fiscal misadventure on this scale is because of a government whose benches are filled with people who have scarcely any understanding of the real economy, much less what it means to try and start, run and sustain a business?
This is right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an important point, because the decisions that are made by this government are having such a profound impact on people in the real economy. And what I would simply say to the British public is that if you are unhappy with the decisions that are being made, you have to change the people who are making them. But the profound impact, as I say, I'm getting, unbelievably, I'm getting heckled on this point. She should get out and talk to the average business person in her constituency. I think she might quieten down quite significantly. The Minister implied that they had no choice. He may still seek to ask me what we would do differently, and others are trying on the opposite benches, implying that there's no other alternative. But he should look at the £70 billion of wasteful spending commitments that I've already listed, the quangos like GB Energy, the payoffs to the unions without any reform or productivity gains, or as I said before, the billions of pounds that are being surrendered as part of the surrender deal to Mauritius. With growth on the decline, inflation, debt and unemployment on the rise, a Chancellor on the brink and confidence crumbling, we may not be able to kill this bill, but we have our chance now to dent the damage. I urge ministers and members across the House to do the right thing and support these amendments today.
Due to the length of front bench contributions, backbenchers are now limited to 5 minutes. Dr. Jeevan-Sundar.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to rise and speak today to Amendments 1 to 19. And today I want to speak about what makes a good tax system and particularly optimal tax theory, a topic that is as thrilling to me as it is to no doubt this entire chamber and this entire House. Now, a good tax system, Madam Deputy Speaker, is defined by neutrality, simplicity and stability, as is set out in the Merleys Review. A tax system designed along these three principles will raise the maximum revenue with the minimum economic impact. Now, each of these amendments in isolation today may seem reasonable, but together they introduce individual exemptions that makes our tax system less neutral, less simple and less stable. Madam Deputy Speaker, these amendments would make our tax system worse. Now, we today are discussing raising national insurance contributions from the largest employers to fix our broken public services and invest in our prosperity. £23 billion of investment, 3/4 from the richest 2% of businesses, also whilst reducing contributions from the 250,000 smallest businesses. Yes, I'll give way.
For giving way. He talks about simplicity. If that is the case, why is he splitting the NICs? He could have introduced an increase on employees at the same time as making the increase on employers, except they've decided not to do that. That would have been a very simple measure to raise the taxes, which doesn't create this complication. How does that tally with his theory?
I say, the Honourable Member, it's a pretty well-established, if you like, introduction to the tax system, now both employee and employer NICs. In terms of the actual simplicity, it's about where it is levied. But I will come on to the specific point that he raises later on in the speech and hopefully provide some illumination on this point. The revenue we're raising here is used to invest in our nation's prosperity, insulating our homes, rebuilding our crumbling schools, hiring more nurses to care for our loved ones. It's getting costs down, it's creating good jobs, and it's rebuilding this country, frankly, from over a decade of despondency and despair. But the amendments today before us, they represent bad policy that puts this at risk. Now, as I may have mentioned this House once or twice before, Madam Deputy Speaker, I did used to be an economist. And I could say to you now that a good tax is one that raises revenue and does not introduce perverse incentives. It ensures that resources goes to activity because there are higher levels of productivity. And a good tax system does introduce three principles in a moment, if you may. Firstly, neutrality. It treats similar activities in similar ways. Secondly, simplicity. It's straightforward and easy to implement. And thirdly, stability. It is predictable. I will give way.
very grateful to the Honourable Member for giving way. I'm wondering if he's talking about productivity and growth, how he squares that with the additional tax on early years, which are allowing parents to be able to work. If parents aren't able to work and these employers can't afford to bring these young people through, how are we going to get the nation working? Nurseries are on their knees and they can't actually take on more children because there are very strict rules about ratios and about the amount of space each child takes.
Very well. Well, firstly, to the honourable member, what I would say is more funding going into early years, and on the tax side, I will deal with this now when I come to speak to the specific amendments. Now, each of these amendments, it seeks to carve out an exemption for something. And I'm sure that people across this House identify, indeed support, some of those individual exemptions. But if we were to pass them, they would give specified sectors advantages not enjoyed by others. I will give way.
Member, it seems to me that his issue isn't with some of these amendments, it's with all of them taken together. So why doesn't he back some of the amendments?
Because that introduces exemptions and perverse incentives and introduces a less clear tax system. It makes the tax system as a whole less efficient. And I'll come to the specific ways in it will. I'll make a little bit of progress and then I will give way. Let's start with non-neutrality. Clauses 7, 12 and 16 create non-neutrality between small charities and non-charities. It thereby incentivises more activity from social enterprises to go as charities instead of businesses. Clauses 8, 10 and 14 an initial NICS bans for small businesses, thereby disincentivising them from growing. Because now if you were, under these amendments, to see your revenue go over $1 million, or employ more than 25 people, you all of a sudden incur a NICS charge. It's a cliff edge. It introduces a perverse incentive, it reduces productivity, it reduces economic growth. I will give way to the honourable member if she still wishes.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to the honourable member for giving way, and I'm pleased that he's talking about growth. But he talks about perverse incentives. What possible kind of perverse incentive could he have in mind about removing a jobs tax from a children's hospice, which care for children and families going through the most unspeakable heartbreak? Where's the perverse incentive in that?
As I think I have set out to the honourable member, the question is not about carving out an exemption for this establishment or that establishment. It's about how do you create a tax system overall that is simple and efficient. It's ensuring that actually you are having businesses and other organisations operating more efficiently. But I would also say this to the honourable member. When they were in government, they did not propose abolishing national insurance for all hospices. Follow your argument to the end of the line. If I may move forward a little bit from the honourable members, I am conscious of the time. This bill also creates more or less simplicity, rather, in the taxes, the amendment. We're not exempting specific sectors and these establishments from this tax. And overall, all of the amendments, 1 to 19, all of them complicate the tax system and create less stability. Raising rates is accepted policy. Introducing special rates for specific sectors or establishments is not. It makes for a less efficient tax system, complicated to govern, expensive to enforce, and more prone to fraud. This is not a predictable way to make tax policy. Not neutral, not simple, not stable. Bad policy that all of us in this House should oppose. And while all of this sounds dry, it does matter to our constituents. Because bad taxes don't just harm economic growth, they bring in less revenue. That means less appointments for the NHS, it means less new teachers, and it means less insulation in our homes. We are elected to this place as legislators. We have a duty to make policy that works. And part of that is seeing the whole from its parts. Ensure we don't introduce loopholes and carve-outs that weaken our tax system and governing responsibly. Thank you.
Order. Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following on from the previous speaker, let me just say, I think the amendments we have received from the other place are clearly not designed with the aim of having a simpler tax system, but they have been sent to us to consider inasmuch as they may create a fairer society. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think should be a driving force in our consideration of these amendments today and the work of this House. Such is the strength of feeling from the other place that they have sent 21 amendments to this place, and such is the strength of feeling on our Liberal Democrat benches that we will support every single one. Taken together, they provide exemptions for health and care providers, for small charities with an annual revenue of less than £1 million, for transport providers for children with special educational needs and disabilities, for small businesses with fewer than 25 employees.
Right honourable friend give way.
I will give way.
Thank you so much for giving way. In my own constituency of Torbay, the hospice of Rowcroft is very impacted by these proposals, as is Baycare, that is an excellent provider of social care. Both of these organisations are having to make really challenging and difficult decisions about how many people they can employ and how they can support people in the communities. Do you share fears, does my colleague share fears that I have that this will result on cost shunting onto our core NHS services?
I thank my honourable friend for that fantastic intervention, and yes, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that one of the major problems with this particular measure is it is so self-defeating, and it is effectively robbing Peter to pay Paul. I've said it once before and I'll say it again, this jobs tax is damaging to growth and self-defeating for our health and care services. We Liberal Democrats have opposed this measure, and throughout the debate we have put forward alternative ways for the government to raise the same amount of revenue, fairer ways in which to do it. But we have also asked that if the government is going to pursue this measure, that at the very least they exempt health and care providers. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government will not get hospitals out of a financial hole by taxing GPs and dentists and pharmacies and care providers who stop people from going into hospitals in the first place. The government will not alleviate the pressure on hospitals by taxing hospices who are now going to be forced to withdraw services from people who are trying to die with independence and dignity in a setting of their choosing, rather than in a cramped hospital corridor or a sterile ward. The government will not keep people out of hospitals if they levy a tax on the very health and care charities that provide vital services for vulnerable people. They provide warm spaces, friendship isolation services, financial advice, welfare support, and social care. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that there would be extra money going into social care, but we know that the money allocated in the budget for social care is dwarfed by this increase in national insurance contributions, and we cannot save the NHS unless we fix social care. I will.
Thank you. You talk about social care, and there are so many examples, but in Hertfordshire we have Quantum Care, which is a not-for-profit social business, which has said the cost will go up by 1.7 million on national insurance contributions alone, and that will impact also the council and social services that are being provided, and really not solving the problem of our health and social care. Would the right honourable member agree with me of this?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and as a fellow Hertfordshire MP, I've met with Quantum Care a number of times and have heard from them as she has too. And it is incredibly worrying for our social care providers, and they are very clear about the impact that this measure is going to have. They will have to put up their costs, they will have to hand back contracts to local authorities, and they will not be able to provide the level of care that many vulnerable people require. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is also going to have a huge impact on small businesses and high streets. And we know that for many people around the country, as I said before, high streets are the most visual and visceral indicator of whether the economy is working in their area. And if they see their high streets going down the pan, then they will lose confidence in their local economy. Our pubs, our hospitality companies, our retail, beauty salons, soft day centres, they are the glue that hold our communities together, but they are also the engine of local growth. And small businesses are crying out right now, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it is the cumulative impact of all of the measures that we're seeing from this government that make them feel overwhelmed. The national insurance contributions, the business rate bills going up, and the new obligations from the employment bill without the resources to manage them. Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the passage of this bill, we Liberal Democrats have set out alternative ways for the government to raise funds. They could look, as we know, that they say it will raise 25 billion for the NHS, but the OBR says that accounting for behaviour change and reimbursing public sector, that will be just £10 billion. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we believe that that money could be raised from different sources, from looking at the digital services tax to the gaming tax to reforming capital gains tax in a way that is fairer and raises more money than the way in which the government has addressed it. So to conclude, this measure and these measures will destroy growth, they could decimate parts of our high streets, and they'll see vulnerable people lose out on vital services. It is why we Liberal Democrats have opposed this increase in the jobs tax, and it is why we ask at the very least for an exemption for our valuable health and care providers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wanted to focus specifically on Lord's Amendment 21, which is about a review of this policy. But I will come on to the practical reasons why I oppose that amendment shortly. And I wanted to focus on the cause of the problem and the cause of the debate that we're having today. The previous government presided over economic chaos, scaring businesses away from long-term investment. The previous government failed to invest in the skills needed for the vital sectors that we've been hearing about today. And the previous government left the NHS on its knees in desperate need for long-term investment. It is hard to make the serious and difficult steps we need to get this country back on its feet. But I do believe that the measures that we're debating today are necessary. So what a contrast we have now. A government laser-focused on economic stability, a government determined to invest in skills for the future, and a government already reducing the NHS waiting list thanks to £23 billion of investment. That is the outcome of this policy. This policy is part of a package of measures to stabilise our economy and invest in the public services that I have to admit, I have been struck by the passion and commitment of members across this House talking about really important public services. I regularly speak to those myself, and I firmly believe that the investment that this government will be able to make in public services, in childcare, in early years, in those breakfast clubs, in the NHS, back into local government where it needs to be, will make in the round a more sustainable public service, which is what we so desperately need. Now, to the practical reasons for why I am opposed to this amendment. The OBR has already considered the implications of this policy. There is publicly available jobs data, I won't give away, publicly available jobs data already available, which will enable everybody to analyse the impact of this policy, and there's already been a detailed assessment in the HMRC policies. I firmly believe that this amendment won't deliver on the objectives that our country needs. Thank you very much.
Dame Caroline Dinant.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of these amendments and would direct the House to my register of members.